This is just delicious. So El Salvador throws DOJ under the bus, tells the UN that U.S. has exclusive jurisdiction over rendition detainees in CCOT, right? Bukele, remember Bukele sitting in the Oval Office saying, well, I couldn't smuggle when we were talking about Abrego Garcia, getting him back. So listen to this. This is by Mike Masnick. For months, the DOJ has insisted to U.S. courts that it has no jurisdiction over the people it rendered to Salvador detention facilities. But when the UN came asking, El Salvador told a very different story. These detainees are exclusively under U.S. jurisdiction and legal responsibility. The contradiction is so blatant, it's almost insulting to the intelligence of the courts that have been hearing these cases. But then again, this is the same administration that thinks you can just lie your way out of human trafficking charges. So maybe the insulting judicial intelligence is the whole point. In the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who the U.S. accidentally shipped to El Salvador despite a court order saying that he could not be sent there, when a judge ordered the U.S. to get him back, the DOJ insisted it was out of their hands. They did. Well, out of our hands. It is my understanding, based on official reporting from the embassy in San Salvador, that Abrego Garcia is currently being held in the Terrorism Confinement Center in El Salvador. He is alive and secure in that facility. He is detained pursuant to the sovereign domestic authority of El Salvador. This is what they kept saying. Earlier, they had also insisted to a court. That's from a court record. Earlier, they had also insisted to a court that the U.S. had absolutely no jurisdiction over the people that they had renditioned to a Salvador concentration camp. Again, plaintiffs admit, as they must, that the United States does not have custody over Abrego Garcia. They acknowledge that there may be difficult questions of redressability in this case, reflecting their recognition that defendants do not have the power to produce Abrego Garcia from CCOT in El Salvador. The Supreme Court even took this at face value in reviewing the case back in April. This also led to the hilariously stupid exchange between President Donald Trump and Salvadoran dictator Nayib Bukele when they met, where they each pretended it was a ridiculous question to even contemplate bringing Abrego back to the U.S. This was all quite obviously a lie. The U.S. was paying the Salvadoran government millions of dollars to house these men, and the contract between the two countries even notes that the U.S. gets to decide the prisoner's disposition. Like you do when you have absolutely no control over something. And of course, when it was politically expedient, the U.S. had no problem at all bringing Abrego back to the U.S. to face bogus, trumped-up criminal charges. But now, in a very different case about these rendition findings, the lawyers have turned up a fascinating document, which they've shared with the court. It was a response from the Salvadoran government to an inquiry about these trafficked detainees from the United Nations. I've been hoping that this was human trafficking. I've been saying this since it happened. I'm so glad that they picked this up. And when confronted by the UN, El Salvador immediately threw the U.S. under the bus, saying that the detainees are fully under the jurisdiction of the United States. Listen to this. The Salvadoran state emphatically states that its authorities have not arrested, detained, or transferred the persons referred to in the communications of the working group. The actions of the state of El Salvador have been limited to the implementation of a bilateral cooperation mechanism with another state, through which it has facilitated the use of Salvadoran prison infrastructure for the custody of persons detained within the scope of the justice system and law enforcement of that other state. In this context, the jurisdiction and legal responsibility for these persons lie exclusively with the competent foreign authorities by virtue of international agreements signed in accordance with the principles of sovereignty and the international cooperation in criminal matters. In this regard, the actions attributable to the Salvadoran state are limited to its sovereignty and territorial jurisdiction, and therefore it cannot be held responsible for the failure to observe the principle of non-refoulement with respect to the persons mentioned. Read that again. The jurisdiction and legal responsibility for these persons lie exclusively with the competent foreign authorities. Not competent, that was a mistake, meaning the United States. This is the same El Salvador that Trump and Bukele pretended had no ability to coordinate with the U.S. on the detainees' fate. Even more damning, the lawyers note that the DOJ was aware of this document and failed to provide it to the lawyers for the people being trafficked, despite being required to do so during discovery. This is from a court document. This information came to the petitioner's attention within the last week when counsel for the petitioners obtained the Spanish language report from one of the families. Although the United States was aware of this document, as evinced by the fact that it was copied on the reports for all 4 cases, it was neither provided to the petitioners, even though it's clearly encompassed in petitioner's request for production, nor provided to the court. Example 2, petitioner's request for production, May 19, 2025. Requesting all documents memorializing, documenting, or describing the arrangements between the United States and El Salvador concerning the detention of alleged Tren de Aragua members in El Salvador. This isn't just discovery violation, it's active concealment of evidence that directly contradicts the DOJ's core legal argument. The DOJ had in its possession a document showing that El Salvador considers the U.S. to have all exclusive jurisdiction over these detainees, while simultaneously telling U.S. courts that the U.S. has no jurisdiction at all. This all matters quite a bit, because the law here says that whoever has constructive custody of the individuals can be forced to produce the body. And here El Salvador has admitted to the UN and the U.S. that it believes the U.S. has exclusive jurisdiction and legal responsibility for these men. Yes, obviously a lot of this has been transparent lies and game playing by both the U.S. and El Salvador. The press conference with Trump and Bukele proved that. They were going to play not it and pretending that there was nothing that could be done to facilitate anything, even as they sat next to each other talking freely. And even both governments knew that El Salvador had already told the UN that the U.S. has exclusive jurisdiction. So you may argue that this is not a big deal because it only confirms what everybody already suspected. That of course the U.S. has control over these people, even as its leaders pretend otherwise. But it could matter quite a bit to the courts. Not only does it reveal that U.S. courts absolutely do have jurisdiction over the cases that people rendition to this Salvadoran hellhole, but it also that the DOJ actively concealed evidence while lying about this very issue in court. Even as the courts continue to display a ridiculous level of deference to the DOJ, we've already seen some signs that various courts' patience is wearing thin. That kind of outright deception, lying to courts about who has custody of these men while hiding evidence that contradicts your core legal argument, seems like yet another pivotal moment in making more and more of the judiciary realize that the Trump regime is not engaging in good faith in court and has no compunction about flat-out lying to avoid taking responsibility for any of its myriad fuck-ups. Turns out that the authoritarian regimes engaged in an immoral and despicable campaign of human trafficking might not be the most trustworthy in court. Who knew? I like these people, Tech Dirt. I like you, Tech Dirt. For now, though, lawyers are alerting the court and suggesting that they may need more discovery to get to the bottom of this. But the bigger question is whether the courts will finally start treating this administration's word with the skepticism it deserves. Yes. Such additional discovery may be particularly important because the new evidence contradicts the underlying custody conclusion in the Kozak Declaration of May 9, 2025, which is dated after El Salvador's response to the UN and after petitioners sought habeas review, that habeas corpus review. So sometimes during the years under the Trump regime, the courts are going to need to internalize Trump's DOJ will tell straight up lies to get what it wants from the court. The sooner they learn that, the better. The court documents are right here. They actually have them filed right here. If you want to see this in full, you can go to TechDirt, just www.techdirt.com. They're great. Okay, thank you for watching my videos. This is great because yes, we all knew this. Yes, we all knew they were lying. Yes, we all know Trump's a liar. Yes, we knew that they were lying about this because, and it is human trafficking. It's a very textbook definition of human trafficking. And the DOJ flat out caught lying in court multiple times. I can't wait to hear what the federal judges are going to make of this. Thank you for watching my videos again.